If you do get in an accident, the difference in a fatality versus an injury can be 5 or 10 miles per hour. Where we start with traffic calming is actually in awareness. People drive where they're comfortable. There's so much data that we don't even know that is being gathered. A lot of that information is used day to day to determine where do we put up a stop sign, where do we put up a street light. When we think about AI, we think about technological advancements, but we still have to remember it's artificial. The hardest thing to accept in our lives is change. I do believe that we can decrease fatalities, but there's so many moving parts.
That is Brett Ferrin, Vice President of Sales in North America at Traffic Logix, which develops intelligent transport solutions and traffic calming measures for safer roads worldwide. With 35 years of experience in building relationships and working across municipal government, sales, and the traffic sector, Brett has accumulated a rich toolbox of experience in helping towns and cities make their roads safer and neighborhoods more livable through planning, community engagement, and solutions across different modes of mobility. He is passionate about safeguarding the ordinary, as well as helping professionals turn their weaknesses into strengths. My name is Peter Marcus Bach, and this is the Grand Challenges Podcast, a show about inspiring individuals who are stepping up to tackle the global challenges that our world is facing in their own unique ways. We reflect on the many out-of-the-box ways our guests have navigated the complexity and intricacies of the environment at the cutting edges of science, engineering, technology, and design. On today's show, Brett and I dive into the topic of traffic safety and the different approaches available to protect our communities, from working with awareness to implementing sustainable widgets along the roadways. We discuss the potential and perils of real-time data insights and artificial intelligence, and what it may mean for the future of mobility, human behavior, and urban planning. Detailed information is provided in the show notes over at petermbach.com/podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and please enjoy the show. Brett, welcome to the show.
Peter, it's good to be here. Thank you for taking the time to have me on the show today.
No, likewise. It's a pleasure to meet you, and I'm looking forward to learning a bit more about your story and your journey in the world of traffic, urban planning, and where this is all heading to in the future.
Well, there's a lot of questions here that I may not be able to answer, but I think we can have a solid conversation about traffic safety and Vision Zero and a lot of things that are going on in the world right now.
And a lot of big headliner words, and I guess things that have been in the transport world. We haven't had many episodes. Actually, we've only had one episode on transport on the show so far. So listeners, if you're curious, you can go check it out with Alexa Del Bosque. And that was more about the, I guess, public transport and the future of mobility and different modes of mobility. But I think here we're also touching upon a very important topic that will relate to that, but also to, I guess, how we've designed our cities over the last decades. And yeah, I guess a lot more as to where we're going.
Very good.
Yeah. But other than traffic, I guess what's also very interesting about you is that when we first met, you actually wanted to figure out what my background was. And it also had a relationship to one of your interests, which is in languages. Could you maybe shed a little bit of light on that? Because I have a fascination for languages too, having grown up in Asia and then lived in Australia and now in Europe and being half German. You raised a few interesting examples of languages you'd be interested in learning as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know why I've been drawn to culture and language, but I remember checking out at the grocery store and the little gal on the other side that's checking me out has an accent. And I just said, excuse me, I'm very interested in culture and language. Where are you from? And I don't even remember where she was from, to be honest with you. But it just was a conversation that just naturally evolved. And it kind of surprised her a little bit. But I think from a very young age, back into junior high, high school, I got into Spanish and I really connected with my Spanish teacher. Well, from there, I actually spent 2 years in Portugal, living in Portugal, and I learned the Portuguese language. I came home and I decided to go to college, minored in Spanish. So I wouldn't say I'm fluent in either language, but I can cause a lot of trouble in Spanish and Portuguese. But then working for the company that I work in now, I've been with Traffic Logix for 14 years. And originally it was owned by a small little Jewish family-owned business from Montreal, Canada. And that's where I started. That's where I went for my job interview. I met this family and I connected. I was very interested in the religious side of things. Again, just that culture and what that's all about. And then one day I'm in the office and I hear our owner and he's speaking Yiddish.
Oh, wow.
And I thought it was German because it sounded very much like German. My father-in-law speaks German. My wife speaks a little German. Anyway, long story short, I asked him and he told me it was Yiddish. And then we started talking about Hebrew, and I'm a religious man. And so Hebrew would be very interesting for me. I haven't found time in my life to learn that. But I'm very interested in language and culture. And when you said you were living overseas, I just thought what a natural way to not only break the ice, but learn a little bit about each other. And so it was a great start to our conversation.
No, definitely. And I think we connected immediately. And, it's sort of how I tend to introduce myself to people when I meet them for the first time. It's that quirky little story about all my movements across the world. And language and culture does connect us because there's always this interest in knowing how things are done in different places of the world. And, for those who would remember back in the day, episode 6 of the podcast, we also talked about a certain cultural continuity across the world. In this case, the example there was kebabs and different forms of it.
I like that.
Yeah. But born in Utah, and you lived in Portugal for 2 years. You studied Portuguese, then you came back and brought Spanish on board as well. And so now moving, I guess, into another, how do you call it, group of languages, the more Germanic. I don't know if Yiddish belongs to that, but you said it sounds more Germanic-like. So very interesting to see what the journey is like jumping from one, I guess, group of languages, in your case, the Latin-based, to a completely new group of languages.
And I think that's my challenge. I'm very comfortable with the Latin languages. Now I have to broaden my horizons a little bit.
No, definitely.
But I do get an opportunity to also associate. We have 2 offices in India. And so now I get to associate with our Indian colleagues on a regular basis. Also very interesting language, very interesting culture, and just some fun things you'll get to learn about people and about life and being less judgmental.
No, definitely.
We do things in our way, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily the right way. It's the way that we were taught. And so from our perspective, we're right. But looking at other people's perspective has always been an interesting challenge.
Yeah, they say keep an open mind because you stand to learn things about the world, about life. And I think that's always a good mindset to have going forward as well, especially in our world, which is becoming more multicultural. And especially when we then look towards our infrastructures as well, that we have to design them keeping all kinds of cultures in mind and how people might use them.
Absolutely.
And so you mentioned already, you work with Traffic Logix and heavily based in making traffic systems more safe, using real-time data insights, Internet of Things, all of the different types of technologies we'll get into, and I'm looking forward to that. But I guess the question begs to be asked, you did a Bachelor of Communications in 1997. That explains a lot of the languages and your love for cultures. And then you actually recently got your MBA from Western Governors University. But how did you get into traffic in the first place?
This is kind of it's a little bit of a lengthy story, and I'll cut it back. I was actually in college, had a job, met with the owner one day, and he said, you know what, I was doing cost accounting, and I'm not an accountant. I'd never wanted to be an accountant. I got there by default because nobody else would do it. And so there I am staring at 3 walls, and I said, you know what, I hate this job.
Yeah.
This is not who I am. I don't get to associate with people. And so I started looking for a job. And back in the day before Indeed, there was Monster.com. And I got on Monster.com and I found a company that was in traffic safety. It was actually paint and glass beads. And that's where I started my traffic safety journey, was selling paint and glass beads. And so I learned about big words like retroreflectivity and all different kinds of things about paint that I'm not going to bore you with. But that's where my journey started. And I did that for a little while. And then I got into asphalt and learned about roadways and how roadways are made. And that's been a huge learning portion of my career that was very beneficial. And I'll tell you why in just a minute. From there, I got into barricades and traffic safety and signage and all kinds of things that, again, benefited me. And that's also where I was introduced to radar signs. And one day I, again, was just kind of frustrated. It was during the 2008 period of economical downturn. I knew that if I didn't change something in my career, other people were going to lose their job. So I went out, I found another job, and it happened to be with Traffic Logix. Again, Monster.com, applied for the job, flew to Montreal, and here's our owner, Louis Newman, saying, I've got a stack of resumes. Brett, yours is on top. You've got experience with asphalt. You've got experience with signage. You've got all this experience that we need if you want the job. Here's your offer. And I flew home with a job offer. It was the first time in my life. And it's been a wonderful company to work for and a wonderful journey. One of the things I really like about the company is they're all about that culture of learning. And they assist all of our employees in one way or another to be able to expand on their learning. Going back and taking classes. For me, it was, hey, I would like to go back and get my MBA. And they said, well, there's really no use for that And I said, well, it's a bucket list item. So pre-COVID, I started my MBA and finished it during COVID. I was 52 years old when I graduated, which for me was a major accomplishment in my life. And again, a bucket list item. But I would have never had that opportunity had it not been for the owner of our company saying, you know what, learning is important to us. And from there, it's really helped me in my career. And I've been able to use that in a lot of different ways, not only to help myself, but to help a lot of my other colleagues.
And just hearing your story, it also just highlights how much complexity there is when you think about traffic in the first place. I mean, you're thinking of the roadways, what kinds of surfaces are they made from? And then all the roadside furnitures that go with them that will either steer the traffic in a certain way or protect the cars, from veering off onto the other lane. I'm just thinking barriers, traffic signaling, just everything that goes into traffic engineering and management. And I mean, I say this from my limited experience, having done it a few years in my Bachelor of Civil Engineering back in Australia.
You're absolutely correct. And the difference in when I started in my career, you could say it was dumb signage. It was a dumb barricade. And now we're going into that smart work zone where we're using AI and we're using all of this electronics and technology. And I don't know exactly where it's going to be going in the future, but I do know that with the technology, the autonomous vehicles, there's so many things that we can talk about and we should talk about when it comes to traffic safety and where we're headed. I don't know that any of us really understand. I remember when they started talking about smart work zones. And in my mind, I'm thinking this is never going to go anywhere. And now we have signs that communicate every 500 feet down the roadway to tell us what's going on in advance of traffic entering the work zone.
I guess it's, information management, retrieval, and then displaying it to the people that are actually on the streets themselves in time so that they can take necessary actions while driving or cycling or walking.
And you said it right there. You said information. We use the word data.
Yeah.
But data is information, right? And so
That's
we're
true.
taking that. We're gathering as much data as we can in the traffic safety world. And I've been to a lot of national trade shows over the last few years. And I remember one in particular was all about the data because everybody seemed to have some way of gathering the data. And multiple people would come up to me and say, we've got all this information, we just don't know how to use it. And now we're getting to the point where we're starting to understand how do we use the data. And so the data actually came first.
Yeah.
Then it was, all right, we've got this information. Now what do we do with that?
I guess in Data Science 101, they always say you got the data first and then you got to generate the insights.
Yes,
Yeah.
insight. I like that terminology.
Yeah. And in a way, traffic safety being the focal point. And Vision Zero, you mentioned that when we began this show, is one of the key pillars of the work you do. And it's really around this idea of eliminating all fatalities and severe injuries on roads across the world. It's been done in Europe for quite some time, but I guess in America, it's also taken off quite rapidly.
Yes. Vision Zero is an international buzzword, international campaign. Everybody's goal is zero fatalities on the roadway. And the complexity of that is all of these things that we're talking about, the autonomous vehicles, better technology with our vehicles, right? And when we have better technology, we feel more comfortable. We've got airbags. We've got all of these things that are trying to keep us safe. Well, sometimes we kind of take that for granted, if you will, and say, okay, well, all of this stuff is out there to keep me safe, so now I can drive as fast as I want.
Yeah, people get complacent.
And we really saw that during COVID because the traffic volumes decreased. Nobody was going to work. Everybody was working at home. So those that were on the roadway, we saw news reports across the world saying our speeds are going up, doubling or tripling.
Oh, geez.
People were very, very comfortable without traffic on the roadway. And so there's all of these things that really pose a challenge. We have driving under the influence of alcohol, of drugs, of all of these different, not only natural drugs, but these artificial ones too. So there's all these complexities when it comes to Vision Zero. It's not just about lowering speed. It's about pedestrians in the roadway. Every large city you go to has either bikes or scooters or something that you can put your card in, rent, whatever. And we have to keep those people safe too. And so it's a lofty goal. And I'm not saying it's unachievable. I'm just saying there's a lot of complexity when it comes to Vision Zero and what's required to really ultimately achieve that goal.
I guess just to illustrate the stats, why we need something like this. I mean, looking at the website itself, they sort of report every year more than 42,000 people are needlessly killed on American streets and thousands more injured. I mean, that's the size of a small town. And I guess the key is there are many ways you could have prevented a lot of these fatalities from happening. Maybe not completely, but I guess part of Vision Zero is to also at least try to reduce the severity, to sort of make it a near miss or a light scratch, call it that.
Yes, exactly. And what we do at Traffic Logix, we're a traffic calming company. So we take one aspect of Vision Zero and we say, you know what, if we could just reduce speed, and if we could bring speeds down 5 or 10 miles per hour, then we're going to save lives. Because if you do get in an accident, the difference in a fatality versus an injury can be 5 or 10 miles per hour, depending on the speed that you're traveling. If you're in a school zone and that school zone is 20 or 25 miles per hour and you get hit, you have a much better chance of surviving than you do at 40 miles per hour. And so I have children, I have grandchildren. From my perspective, if I can help keep them safe, our overall, I guess you could call it our mission statement, is safeguarding your ordinary. And I love safeguarding your ordinary. We get up in the morning, we get dressed, we get in our car, we get on our bike, we go for a walk, whatever we do, but we expect that we're going to be safe. And if I can safeguard your ordinary, safeguard your ability to get up and do what you want to do and not feel threatened, then I've accomplished my goal. Last week, Peter, I was lying in bed at 2:00 in the morning. I heard someone on my back porch. And they took off running. I don't know if they heard me moving around or whatever, but it really affected me because it took away my sense of safety. I immediately put up cameras on the outside of my house. And, I did all these things to try and protect my family. And I think that's the way I see what I do on a daily basis, is I'm not only trying to keep my family safe, but your family and other families as well.
Yeah, I guess it's not just the actual safety in terms of the functioning of the infrastructure and the behavioral control, but it's also reducing the perceived risk of the people that use the mobility system as well. In relation to the example you just gave, you may have been totally safe in certain cases, but maybe the risk that you felt was a lot higher than I guess you would have expected.
Yeah, if that would have happened in the daytime, I wouldn't have felt as threatened, right? But 2:00 in the morning, I know something isn't good. And so we can compare that to a school zone, right? Yep. Out on the freeway, you go 10 miles per hour over the speed limit. Maybe it's not as big a deal as if it is in a school zone or in a residential neighborhood. But I think what you said is absolutely correct. It's just helping us feel safe in whatever environment that we're in. And there are a lot of things we can get into the individual solutions and how they play into safeguarding our ordinary, because sometimes it's just a matter of we drive where we're comfortable. I've been in so many police departments over the years, and I've talked to so many police chiefs, and they validated what I'm going to say here, but people drive where they're comfortable. You get in your vehicle and we don't sit there with the steering wheel and stare at the speedometer as we're driving down the road. If it's a wider road and the road is a new paved road with new markings and brand new sidewalks, we feel very comfortable at a higher speed. Now, if you narrow that roadway and there's cars on either side where maybe it limits your visibility, or there's trees, or it's a curved road, all of these things affect the way that we drive. And so a lot of the solutions that we have, they're not going to send you a citation. They're not going to do anything. They're just reminders on a daily basis as we're driving down the road that, hey, this is your behavior. And sometimes we all need those reminders of our behavior.
I find it so fascinating in transport planning how you really have to plan for the human behavior. And in fact, when I took the courses in my undergraduates, one of the most interesting things I read was that an average human can only focus on 7 things simultaneously, after which they start to lose any sense of control. So I guess it's, if you're thinking driving, you'd have the steering and commandeering of the car. Maybe they have music running. And then I guess you have the signage, which has to be very clear and to paint a clear picture. And that's already quite a few elements. If there's a passenger, that's the 4th one. There are not many other things left that you can, I guess, influence the driver before they start to lose control. And it's designing for these psychological elements as well, and making it clear to them from the get-go that the road veers in a certain way, and like that you can control them.
I really like that. I hadn't heard that, but 7 items seems like a lot until you start really taking a look at what we're focusing on when we drive. And now we add cell phones and text messages and all of these different things that distract us. And maybe we do need a few more reminders.
No, definitely. And I guess in relation to Vision Zero, I saw a nice comparison with, call it the traditional approach to traffic planning. And what Vision Zero does really nicely is that it accepts the fact that we humans are imperfect. We make mistakes, and you got to plan for that. So it's being precautionary, I guess. It's like a risk management approach. It doesn't assume that the world operates in a perfect way.
Yeah, because there are no perfect roads. There are no perfect scenarios. Certainly are no perfect people. And even as much as we want to think that even our vehicles are perfect because they're autonomous and they can do things, we're finding that there's issues, there's flaws, there's accidents still happening with those autonomous vehicles. So we don't live in a perfect world. We just need to accept that.
And so you've already mentioned the traffic calming measures, which I'm very curious to get into in a bit. But I guess what are some other ways that you can approach trying to implement Vision Zero and achieving it on the roads?
One of the things that's very intriguing to me right now is artificial intelligence. And I don't know where we're going with this artificial intelligence, if that's the analyzation of all of this data or some creative mind out there. I mean, who would have ever thought we would have been able to sit here thousands of miles away and have this conversation with all the technology that we have now? I don't know where the technology is going to take us, but there are a lot of individuals out there that are a lot smarter than I am that are constantly, day after day, trying to come up with solutions that are going to help with this Vision Zero initiative. And I know that there's so much federal money, there's transportation bills and money being thrown at this all the time because we understand what a big deal this is, and it's not getting any better. We can say maybe 1 year that, okay, our fatalities went down, but the reports that I'm reading, the information that I've looked at, maybe we go down 1 year, but the next year we go back up. And so it's understanding, why are we going back up? What's happening? And again, there's just things that we don't understand about the decisions that we're making with technology and things and how that's going to affect things moving forward. And I'm not a doomsday guy. Like I say, I do believe that we can decrease fatalities, but there's so many moving parts. And I'm focusing in my career on one of those moving parts. I'm not working on distracted driving. I'm not working on drunk driving. I'm working on speed and what can I do to reduce speed, and using that as our portion of Vision Zero.
And speed is often one of the most obvious variables and also controllable variables to get people to just simply slow down. Because I remember when I was doing my driving tests, one of the biggest lessons they gave me was what would happen if you're going at a certain speed and then you had the brake. I think your body mass would be propelled forward at a force that I think is 4 times, if not far more than that. I think I'm misquoting here. We'll definitely have to find the stats, but it's a huge magnitude more of force that's propelling you forward if you were to brake suddenly. And just reducing the speed by 10 miles per hour or kilometers per hour, that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and seatbelts, right? So that's why we have seatbelts. And people drive every day without their seatbelt. But if they are in that accident, like you said, the higher the speed, the more that force, it may not be 4 times, it may be 25 times at a certain speed. So that is all relative in comparison to your speed. So let me talk about braking distance, because you mentioned speed in regards to how it affects your body inside your vehicle, but braking distance. And again, we talked about 25 miles per hour, you've got a much better chance of survival. Well, part of that is because of braking distance. And for every 5 miles per hour, you're increasing your braking distance exponentially. And there are many, many statistics. And we've actually got a former police officer who used to be an investigator of crashes, and he can give you all of those statistics. But braking distance is a major, major factor when it comes to speed.
And there are rules of thumb that allow you to calculate that pretty quickly as well. And if not, try it yourself. I guess I certainly did that when I went through driving school. So, emergency braking and just slamming them down to see how far the car moves is already quite an eye-opener.
Yeah, for sure.
And so you've got the behavior of a single driver, but when you're looking at the road system, you have thousands of cars in all different locations across the city, across the country. Data is being collected about them, their speeds, how fast they're increasing their speeds or decreasing depending on congestion. I mean, how do you use that massive amount of data to then support just general planning and management, or also Vision Zero's goals?
Yeah, there's so much data that we don't even know that is being gathered. Like you mentioned, not only just the speed and the congestion and turning movement counts, flow of traffic, all of that is useful information. And back to what you said about long-term planning, a lot of that information is used in long-term planning. So we're developing roadways not for 5 years from now, but 25 years from now, 30 years from now, and trying to figure out how do we navigate through our communities based upon expected growth. And so a lot of this information is used for that. A lot of that information is used day to day to determine where do we put up a stop sign? Where do we put up a street light? How do we manage that flow of traffic around a school so that everybody is not going through a school zone? There are a lot of different devices, technologies, useful items that can be used in traffic safety to channel traffic. That's the word they use, channel traffic. But I remember I served on the city council, so I'm going to take a sideline here. Served on the city council in my community for 6 years. And this was a community of about 1,800 people when my wife and I first moved here. Now we're a little, probably closer to 10 or 12,000 over 8 years.
That's a decent growth.
It's decent growth, farming community. So a lot of these older farmers have sold their farms and now they're developing them.
Wow.
Well, they brought a grocery store into town while I was on city council.
Oh.
And there is a term in that municipal world called NIMBY. It refers to not in my backyard. And so everybody would come into city council and they would say, I don't want a shopping center. I don't want a grocery store. Well, now we all shop there and we love it. But the concern was traffic. How is this going to affect our traffic? How is this going to affect, are we going to need streetlights in town? You know, our government isn't really, we don't have a lot of money coming in. So how's that going to affect our ability to put out a fire if a fire breaks out in the grocery store? There's just so many things that we have to think about. And it's right next to a school.
Oh, geez.
So now we say, okay, well, how is this going to affect big trucks coming by in that school zone? I'm just really fascinated. And I've learned so much in my life about so many different things that I never would have thought about.
It's amazing to see when you're trying to plan out a city, the effect a particular use can have on just every other resulting process. So pedestrian flows, traffic flows, even in my field, it's looking at the effect of surface ceiling. When you think shopping mall or grocery store, there's going to be car parks, there's going to be lots of sealed surfaces. That's going to have an impact as well on the local climate in the area, on how water flows, which can then also lead to flooding, which in turn causes problems for traffic because of disruptions of water on the surface. So it's amazing to see just how one little change in a pretty well-functioning town or city has to all of a sudden have this cascading effect on so many other aspects.
Back to the data question. All of this can be discussed, it can be evaluated, it can be determined either pre-development or post-development with data. And one of the things that we do at Traffic Logix is we gather all of this data with a plethora of different devices that all connect into a back-end cloud.
Okay.
So everything we do is in the cloud. We turn on our computer, we turn on our cell phones, everything goes to a cloud. Years ago, our executive team determined that this was where we needed to go. And I'm glad that they did because we have a very, very good back-end cloud that all of our devices connect into. And so I can sit here on my computer, I can pull up devices from around the world, and I can look at this data. And so can our customers. And so it's that immediate access to data to say, in the school zone this morning, we had 46 vehicles go through at a higher rate of speed. We need to get a police officer to go out and sit in that school zone and write some citations and slow some people down. And that's just one example of what we can do. But all of this data is not only being used for planning, but it's also being used for day-to-day decisions when it comes to Vision Zero, when it comes to traffic safety and safeguarding our ordinary.
It's amazing what digitalization is doing to the world, where all of a sudden you don't just have new means of making better decisions in the long term, but that you can really act the second's notice or the minute's notice when something actually looks off in the data itself.
Yeah. I want to tell a story really quick because this was a really fun experience in my career. But I was visiting with a police chief. I happened to be a police chief here in Utah. He's retired now. And we were having a conversation about radar signs. So radar signs flash your speed, tell you how fast you're going. It'll maybe display a message that says slow down or too fast, or it'll just flash your speed. Depending on the speed, we can display different parameters.
I know those. I have a few here. They display a smiley or a frowny, depending on whether
yes,
you're going
that's
too
another
fast.
one. And the smiley face is actually one of the most common because they've done a lot of studies over the years and found that positive reinforcement is actually better than the negative reinforcement on the too fast or slow down. So people like to see that smiley face. Well, this police chief at the time said, I had this sergeant and his wife, he and his wife had just moved into town, and they moved into this little community out on the edge of town. And she would call me every day and say, Chief, you've got to slow down traffic. They're speeding. We've got to do something about this. And so he said, great, I'll put up a sign, I'll gather some information, and we'll determine what we need to do. So they did that. They gathered the information, ran the reports. After about 2 weeks, he called the sergeant. He said, Sergeant, would you please have your wife come into my office? I'd like to speak with both of you. So they came into the office and he handed him the report. And he said, now listen, there is no speeding problem.
Okay.
So what do we learn from that? That public perception or personal perception, it's important that we respond to that information. And a lot of what happens, whether it be from the police department or from the mayor or the city council, is reactive based upon resident complaints. But not all of those resident complaints are warranted. And this was a huge learning experience for me in my career to say, okay, I'm not only providing information on those that are violating the speed limit, but I'm also validating the fact that public perception is real, but it's just perception. It's not reality.
And I guess with these kinds of new ways of collecting data, it becomes easier not only to identify what's actually happening, but to also be able to convince the public that certain perceptions they have about the safety of roads, about the transport system, they're actually unfounded and that there's no worries that they need to have.
Exactly. Yeah, I couldn't have said that better. You're much more eloquent in speech.
Oh, I just try my best to summarize it. So
very well done.
Thank you. I guess in terms of the data gives you that ability to identify where to intervene. It gives you that ability, as we discussed, to sort of subdue any potential negative perceptions that are completely unreal. It gives you a way to plan for the future, also anticipating what will happen if you change your land use, as you mentioned, the grocery store. But once you identify these locations, and I guess there's a certain prioritization that will have to go in place, you then come in with traffic calming measures. And I guess this is something that, if I had to put both our professions on a spectrum, this is really where the intersection is, because I work in blue-green infrastructures and they can be used as traffic calming measures. But I guess before we get into that, because I'm curious to hear your perceptions of that, what are some examples of traffic calming measures that you work with at Traffic Logix?
So we have, where we start with traffic calming is actually an awareness.
Okay.
So back to the radar signs, driver feedback signs is what we refer to them as. But these are signs that just tell you how fast you're going, and they're the gentle reminders. Past the gentle reminders, now we can go to more awareness. And we can do that with speed cameras. So when you think of speed cameras, you think of getting that citation in the mail. We can do that, but I'm going to hold on to that for just a minute, because we can also do awareness, where we can just do a friendly little reminder. We can do a little social media shaming. We can do some of those things. And we have customers that do that, right?
Wow.
We don't want to cite them. We just want to remind them. So it may be a little reminder in the mail, but I've seen some creative social media shaming over the years, and it's very effective in saying, hey, we know where you're at. We know what you're doing. Please just slow down.
It's like, I know where you live.
They know that too. Then there's another device that we can use, and that's vertical deflection. Vertical deflection refers to adjusting the height of the roadway. So think speed humps, think speed bumps, think along those lines. So we make a variety of recycled rubber traffic calming solutions that are customized not only for the width of the roadway, but also for the speed of the roadway.
Okay.
So the last thing that we want to do is we don't want to slow people down below what that posted speed limit is. Speed limit's 25, they're entitled to go 25 miles per hour. If we put a device out there that slows them down to 5 or 10 miles an hour, now all we do is increase the number of complaints. We increase their level of frustration. So we want to make sure that the device that we put in the roadway is customized for those variables, if you will. So all of these are basically recycled car tires. It's a green product, and I love the fact that it's a green product. So we take those, we create those solutions. But the issue with that is that it affects everyone on the road. Whether you're speeding or not, if you're driving over those, you're affected by it.
Yeah.
And not everybody likes that. So we have a 3-step traffic calming process. We call it the stave of speeding. First of all, we start out with gathering the data, figuring out where the problem areas are. And then we go into awareness. Okay, let's put up some signage. Let's remind them. Let's see if we can just use those general reminders before we get into the physical things that we need to do to slow them down, being speed humps and speed cushions, speed tables, all of these different rubber vertical deflection items. And then from there, now we can get into the citations. Now we can get into speed enforcement with cameras where we're taking a picture and we're sending out a violation. We do that very effectively in not only municipalities, we do a lot of private communities, homeowners associations, a lot of businesses now. I've been working with one just this week where they were using our cameras and they would send out citations to employees, and employees were actually being terminated.
Oh, wow.
Because they were repeat offenders in the parking lot or in that private roadway. So a lot of different ways that we can slow traffic down, again, with gentle reminders, all the way up to now it's going to cost you something.
I like the progression of that because it means we don't need the infrastructure intervention or the physical intervention just yet. I think try to solve it from a more non-structural perspective first. And if it doesn't work, then I guess, reach for, the widgets to implement.
Yes, absolutely. And no matter what we do, Peter, there's always going to be some individuals out there that make those decisions, and we can't change that behavior no matter what we do.
And I guess it becomes tossing up, can we afford to annoy everyone else with these measures just so that we can definitely control the behavior of these few individuals that you mentioned who don't want to cooperate?
Think about, again, safeguarding your ordinary. I keep coming back to that. But if your community uses a lot of speed humps, a lot of vertical deflection, I've been in a lot of these communities, especially in the southeast of the United States. They seem like very safe, very secure environments. At least people feel safer and they feel more secure in those environments because of those items being used on the roadway. And so sometimes, again, public perception is huge. We're going to do everything that we can to help you feel safe in your neighborhood. And it's actually a proven fact that the safer we feel, the higher value that they place on our homes.
Yeah,
so you want to sell your home, you can sell it for more money because we live in a safer community.
When you think about livability, safety, not just in transport, but general safety is always one of these factors. Others being, I guess, safety to the elements as well, climate control, air quality, things like that.
Yes, absolutely. The things that you're working on in your day-to-day.
Yeah, definitely. And in a way, that's what I'm curious to hear about from you. So when I ventured into blue-green infrastructures in the US, they have different terms: low impact development, green infrastructure, whatever you want to call it. And we've had plenty of episodes where we've discussed this terminology issue. But coming back to the actual topic before I get sidetracked. So a lot of these green systems, so think, roadside basins, which can collect stormwater, that also grow nice, beautiful vegetations and, shrubs and bushes, but also strategically chosen plants. I've seen many examples where on smaller streets, so lower speed roads, where they implement them literally within the roadway, and it sort of creates a sort of veering maneuver that the drivers have to do. So they're forced to slow down, or else their car will end up in the ditch, call it that. What are your thoughts on those kinds of interventions? Have you ever encountered streets where those things have actually been done? And how would you describe people's perceptions to these kinds of more in-your-face kind of interventions?
Years ago, when I first started in my career, we actually had a traffic engineer come in, and he actually trained our sales team. Yeah. And he gave us a whole bunch of different terminology, and he gave us a whole bunch of different solutions that we didn't sell. But they're very, very valuable when it comes to traffic calming. That little shift in the roadway, that little turn in the middle, it's called a chicane.
Oh, yeah.
And it's very, very effective. When I was doing striping, paint, and glass beads, one of the things you can do is you can actually narrow the roadway just by narrowing the lane of traffic. And by narrowing that lane of traffic, bringing those lines closer together, it's a natural traffic calming measure. So while there's a lot of different things that I can do, that I can use in my toolbox, a lot of the things that can be used for traffic calming are those natural green, put up a row of trees down the middle of the roadway, create a divided road with some greenery down the middle. Again, it affects the visibility of the driver. And when we affect the driving habits or the visibility or the way the road looks, all of those are natural traffic calming measures, and they're very, very effective. And so I think when it comes to traffic calming, I would say we have so many tools in our toolbox. And if we just look at the tools that Traffic Logix provides, I would love to sell all of the solutions that we have. And trust me, it's my livelihood. But I am also smart enough to know that there's a lot of other things that we can and should be using to slow down traffic, to calm our streets.
And I guess you sort of described that with the first non-structural approach. Can we do this through awareness? And then one of the last efforts would be to then really intervene into the actual landscape.
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of this comes back to designing those neighborhoods, right? When we create straight roads that go on for miles and miles and miles, and people just have that line of sight for 3 or 4 miles, guess what? We just opened up their visibility for a long stretch of speeding. So what do? We try and put in stop signs. Or now we're going back to that vertical deflection because we don't know what else to do. And so long-term planning is really, really important to say, you know what, maybe we need to shift this just a little bit. Let's put a natural curve here in the road, or let's put a 90-degree turn. And some of those things can be scary because now you've got drunk drivers or whatever that may not make that turn, or new drivers at nighttime in the fog. There's so many complexities when it comes to this, but long stretches of roadways scare me. I'm just going to be honest with you.
Oh, I can imagine. It reminds me of the time I was driving down the German Autobahn. Those are long, very visible stretches of road. And without a speed limit, it can get quite scary. So for those who are not as experienced driving, I say, get familiar with your vehicle and be confident before you go on these roads. But I can definitely understand your point there. And in a way, planning, it's already touching upon a whole, call it bucket list of items that have to be checked off so that your city functions well. And this just adds another item to think about when you're trying to deal with the planning.
Absolutely. There's another portion of this that doesn't really play into traffic calming, but it's the reality of the world that we live in. And that's socioeconomic situations, right? That little family who, because of inflation, is just really struggling to get by and they can't afford to put new tires on their car. Or maybe they have a check engine light that's coming on and the car's not running properly. And whether we believe it or not, all of those things also play into this Vision Zero. And they're things that we have to think about. It's the reality of people's lives.
It harks back to one of its guiding principles, which is we need multidisciplinary approaches. So it's not just the local traffic planners, but it's also the engineers, the policymakers, public health professionals, focusing on roadway design, speeds, behaviors, technologies, policies, social circumstances. Oh my God, the list goes on.
Yeah, you just listed a whole bunch of them. And I'm sure if we sat here long enough, we could probably come up with 10 or 12 more.
Oh, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, ice cream trucks. Nah. But planning in the future, I mean, it's getting more complex. We're dealing with lots of challenges, population growth, urban expansion. Well, in some cases, they're trying to maintain the expansion, increase density, but a number of cars are going to be growing. We've heard on previous episodes that, new mobility choices will come into play. The road space is becoming more contested day by day. I mean, what are some challenges we're going to be facing designing for safety going into the future? I mean, are these traffic calming measures going to be enough? Do we need to rethink, how we approach it in general?
I do think we need to maybe rethink this just a little bit. And let me just give you an example. And I hadn't thought about this until just recently. Somebody brought this to my attention. But we have so many electronic vehicles on the roadway, right?
Yeah.
Well, if you put an electronic vehicle next to a vehicle with an engine, you hear that car start up. You hear it driving down the roadway. With an electric vehicle, there's no sound. Whether that's motorcycles, and you see a lot more electric motorcycles now on the roadway, e-bikes. While a lot of these things are technological advancements in the world, they also bring another level of complexity. And what about that individual who can't see and relies on his hearing?
Yeah.
And he steps out into the roadway thinking, okay, there's no cars coming for whatever reason. And it's an electric vehicle.
Oh, no.
So we need to think about the changes that are taking place in technology that change the way we've always done things. And the sound of vehicles is just one thing that I've been thinking about in the last little while. And we could, again, list a whole bunch of different technological advancements and what's going on with those. But I don't know where this is going to go, Peter. I don't. And I wish we had a crystal ball to look at this and say, this is ultimately where we're heading. Are we going to have flying vehicles? And now we need more traffic controllers. I don't know.
I think we have enough challenges in 2D. I think going 3D, I think it's a few decades away, but I can imagine if we had to start going in 3D, safety and just generally managing the flow of traffic is going to become even more complex.
Absolutely.
One type of technology you've already mentioned at the start, autonomous vehicles, and we're going to have more of them on the road. And I guess this also pushes us towards our discussion that I definitely am looking forward to getting into, which is about the influence of artificial intelligence on the transport system. I mean, autonomous vehicles, there are some famous examples of tests being done and, them now being on the road in certain cities. But it's also a whole decision-making algorithm behind them to actually navigate the roads safely. I mean, what's your take on how they have changed the way we look at road safety?
Wow, that's a complex question. There's a lot that goes into that. I attended recently a conference in Phoenix, Arizona. And as part of this conference, it was a traffic safety conference. And they had Ubers. And they were autonomous vehicles picking you up in an Uber. And the buzz around the conference center was, are you going to take one of those? Are you going to take one of those? Are you going to take one of those? And I have to say that a lot of those were just empty vehicles driving around town because I think a lot of people are still skeptical about autonomous vehicles and where that's going to go. And I think there's a lot of concern. My wife and I are looking at a new vehicle right now. We were in the dealership the other day. We were talking and they were saying, well, you've got to buy an electric vehicle. We've got so many of these electric vehicles. And they said, we actually lose money on every vehicle. And so there was that whole conversation about we're trying to sell more vehicles, but people are skeptical of that. Now, autonomous vehicles, we've seen a lot of people jump on board with that. But I think with all of the ones that have jumped on board, I could probably give you 10 or 15 or 20 examples of people that are saying, I don't trust that. I'm not ready to go there. And so you have the early adopters. You have those people that'll jump on after it's kind of that proven. And then you have the late adopters that say, no, I'm going to wait for all of these accidents and everything to happen, all the bugs to get worked out. And I think we're still working out the bugs. I think when it comes to autonomous vehicles, when it comes to electric vehicles, when it comes to smart work zones, a lot of the things that are going on right now, we're still working out the bugs because we're just in that season of change, if you will. And I don't think we're really there yet. I think we're trying to get there. But I don't know if that answers the question or if I just did a good job of tiptoeing around that.
I think you definitely painted a very real picture. It's actually quite interesting to hear how many were hesitant at the conference to use these autonomous vehicles. I can only imagine in a completely different context, everyone would be like, oh my God, cool, I want to ride one. Let's go. So it's very eye-opening to see that hesitation is a real thing. And I guess the reason I brought that up and in a way wanted to start with this is because, artificial intelligence, really the whole AI story is, I got a lot of hype around this idea of, autonomous vehicles. If you think some of the first Tesla EVs also had the obstacle avoidance. So the car is supporting you in the driving.
Yeah.
But there's then the famous trolley problem, the thought experiment that was, I guess, put forward to see how would AI react. And just to quickly, I guess, summarize it up, would the AI, if faced with a decision which would result in fatality, I guess, of someone on the road or veering off to safety of that person, but at the expense of the driver, what would the AI choose? And it's a really harsh experiment, but it's a real problem that one has to confront. And I think this thought experiment became even more prominent with the rise and deployment of autonomous vehicles.
And I think you bring up a really good point. And we need to, when we think about AI, we think about technological advancements, but we still have to remember it's artificial.
Yeah.
It's based upon a calculation. It's not based upon feeling. It's not based upon emotion. So when we rely strictly on AI, we take away the human side of things in some situations. Now, I'm not saying AI is a bad thing, but I think we need to realize how AI could really change our lives and not, like you said, we don't know that algorithm in the background of what's going to happen with that trolley. Are they going to choose to take the life? Who's making those decisions on the backside with that algorithm? So that's one of the things that scares me. Now, I'm older, a young guy like you. You're growing up with this. It will become a natural part of your life moving forward, right?
Either that or a challenge that we have to face even more so.
Either or. But for your generation, it's going to be a lot easier to accept than it is for my generation, or even those baby boomers, those individuals who are closer to the end of their lives, who are still struggling with how do I turn on my computer or how do I adapt to my cell phone and the technology of a smartphone. So this is new technology and we have to adapt, we have to learn, we have to grow. And back to what I said earlier, this is early stages. And I think for me, seeing what AI can do for traffic calming and in the traffic safety world, I think we need to be a little slower to adopt this from a decision-making standpoint and maybe use it more to analyze the data. One of the things that I'm hearing in the municipal world is a shortage of labor. We don't have the time to evaluate the data. If we could use AI to help evaluate the data and summarize it, we can take 1 million pages of data and with AI come up with some very valuable solutions in a very short period of time that can speed up the evaluation process and therefore help us make decisions quicker. And I personally, that's my take on artificial intelligence for right now. Let's use it for evaluation purposes, not necessarily decision-making purposes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from. And it's also echoed by, some notable writers from books that I've read that we should be treating AI as a co-pilot, hence when you think of Microsoft's assistant, it's also called co-pilot, but that the decision should still and the responsibility should still rest with the human operator. And I guess the same goes for these autonomous vehicles. People say at the end of the day, the AI has no idea what it's doing. It's merely just optimizing its fitness and trying to reach the decision based on what the most optimal solution is. But that has no emotions attached to it. And it's only purely based on the data that it's trained with. So at the end of the day, responsibility should rest with the human operator, the human designer of the system.
We have the ability, we choose not to use it, but we have the ability to limit people's speed, right? When it comes right down to it, we could change mechanically governors in the vehicles. We can do things that would limit people's speed. And so AI has the ability to advance our behavior, change our behavior, limit our behavior. We also have the ability to do that. And as humans, we've chosen not to do that, right?
Yeah.
And I think we have all of the technology in the world to change human behavior on a daily basis. And yet, at what point in time do you say it's human behavior and we have to allow for freedoms? We have freedom of speech. We have freedom to do all of these different things. And I think there's overreach and there's underreach. Sometimes we don't do enough. I don't know. You really got me thinking today about a lot of different processes and procedures and decisions that are made on a daily basis. But like it or not, we don't always make the right decision, whether it's we're going to speed or we're not going to speed, or we're not going to put this solution into a vehicle because we want to give people the freedom to make their own decisions.
I guess it's really an ethical choice, as to what extent you want to exert some kind of enforcement or control on the people. For their own good. Sometimes people don't know what's good for them until they're given the medicine. I guess sometimes new ideas take a while to gather speed. I'm just thinking, the famous example of the iPhone. People sometimes don't know what they want until they're actually shown it. And they don't know a different kind of comfort or safety until they actually experience it. Do you think this is the case in the transport field?
Yeah, I do. I do think that there's so many unknowns, and we don't know, we haven't had electric vehicles long enough to know what that environmental impact could be, what that long-term impact could be. We certainly know the impact from motor vehicles on the environment, on our health, on all of those things. And so this is that season of change, and we're going to live it. We're going to figure this out. I don't know when we're going to be able to put our finger on it and say, okay, yeah, this was a good decision or this was a bad decision.
Yeah. And you have a favorite saying, actually, when nothing changes, nothing changes.
One of my very most favorite sayings, and applies to so many different things in our lives, but the hardest thing to accept in our lives is change. I have an almost 87-year-old mother, and when it comes to technology, when it comes to all of these changes, she's just more comfortable sitting in her easy chair and crochet and knit and do all those things that she loves to do. And this season of change, she calls us all the time and says, hey, I need somebody to help me fix my remote. I can't get my television stations. I can't figure out my iPad. I can't figure out my cell phone. Come and help me. And she understands that technology is important. She's just not comfortable pushing the buttons. I could call my 5-year-old grandson and he could go over there and fix it for her in a minute because he's grown up with that.
That's true.
And his life will be different in the roadway than mine was when I was a kid. Riding my bike back and forth to school, not a care in the world, not wearing a helmet, not worrying about an e-bike. And now he'll probably be riding an e-bike and he'll have a helmet, and maybe he'll have to have a license for that. I don't know what's going to happen with that moving forward, but our lives are changing, and they have changed. I have a good friend who drives around in a Model T Ford.
Okay.
And he loves that vehicle. I was just with him the other day. He said, hey, do you want to go for a ride? He's got all of these old vehicles. But the technology of that vehicle versus the brand new GMC truck that he drives is night and day.
Night and day. Wow. But I guess change is the only constant.
And when nothing changes, nothing changes.
And when nothing changes, nothing changes. I guess, be happy. It's like no news is good news.
Yes. And how grateful we should be for change.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's a lot of change coming in all of our lives. Mine certainly. But excited to see what's in store. What about you? What's your plans going forward? What's going to be occupying you in the next few years?
Well, I'm a big family guy. And so, family changes constantly. It seems like I get 4 grandkids a year. So,
oh, wow.
We have 16 grandchildren right now. And I'm sure that portion of my life will be changing. I'm getting older. I have to face that. I'm starting to look at, decisions for retirement and what's that going to look like for me. And my job is constantly changing, taking on new responsibilities and new challenges. And how do I use the technology that I've been given to do my job better and to coach my team and to help them do better and to also learn and adapt to a changing atmosphere in the roadway. I remember when I first started in my career, there was a gentleman that was working for a major traffic safety company. And he said everything that they were doing at that point in time was for the aging public because their vision was going to be changing. And so the baby boomer population was the biggest population that we had in the world at the time. So we were trying to adapt the roadway to that baby boomer population. That was kind of a shift there, but I don't know what's in store for me. But I do know that one of my goals is to continue to be involved, not only from a professional standpoint, but from a personal standpoint. I'm a big volunteer guy. I will continue to volunteer in my community to try and make things better for those around me. Again, not only for me personally, not only for my friends and neighbors, but for individuals that I don't know. Another favorite saying that I have is there are no strangers, just people that I haven't met yet. Yeah. I haven't met you yet, Peter. But I feel like if we ran into each other, we would shake hands, maybe give each other a hug, and we would connect.
Definitely.
And I've already considered you a friend. And I think...
thank you. Likewise.
I've really enjoyed that opportunity in my life to get out and meet new people. And I hope I never lose that aspect of my life.
Oh, that's very beautiful. And yeah, I must definitely come out to the US. I'm long overdue for a trip. And I think my travel list is getting longer and longer and longer. So I'm looking forward to planning that at some point in the near future.
Well, you tell me where you're going to be in the U.S. I'll meet you there.
Oh, okay. I'd love to see where you are because I haven't seen much of the country. But I look forward to seeing how things progress in future. It's a very intriguing subject. And I think as I get more interested in building better cities, more livable cities, you cannot disregard the mobility system. You need to make sure you somehow integrate that in everything that you do. Same goes with nature, same goes with climate. So it's going to be exciting times, more complex, but exciting times. Brett, this has been a very inspiring and very eye-opening conversation for me that has got me thinking a lot about the transport system and how we, design urban environments for people, and that there's a lot more that goes to it than just simply placing infrastructures, and that there are ways you can do it without having to build something in the first place. But like I do with every guest, I'd love to ask you a few questions so that listeners can learn even more about you. And so I guess that inspiration, you talked about the story of the grocery store. You reflected about where you're going into the future as well. Your love and passion for ensuring the roads are safe. But what is that day-to-day inspiration that gets you going?
I'm going to go back to family because for me, that's the most important thing in my life. And when I get up in the morning, I start my day thinking about my family and all that they're doing. All of my kids are married. My grandkids are off going to school and doing their things. And what I do on a daily basis affects them. And so if I can do my job, then I'm going to keep them safe. And not only that, but friends and colleagues and just people in general. And not everybody can say that they have a job that affects everybody in the world. But I literally have a job that affects everybody in the world every day.
That is beautiful when you think about it. I think we've had a similar discussion on the show before. I think it was episode 21 with Danielle Dagenet, who also reflected upon having a job that allows you to be able to affect many people. And I think at the end of the day, safety Yeah, knowing that your loved ones are safe can do wonders to your levels of motivation, your drive to do even better, to create even better change in the world.
Absolutely.
Was there a key moment, book, paper, event, or person that completely changed the course of your career or mindset?
I have a close friend that I met in Portugal years ago that actually got me involved with Dale Carnegie. The Dale Carnegie course was something that was his livelihood, but he came over to the United States. He lived in Portugal, but he came over to the United States and started the Dale Carnegie program locally and asked me to get involved. And looking back, I didn't realize how many of those principles that I was using on a daily basis, but I've also learned many more things that I've been able to apply in my life. One of those was the very first conversation that we had, and it's called that information stacking. And when you and I first got on, we started to talk about culture and we started to talk about where have you lived. And I've used that so many times as a salesperson. I walk into someone's office and I'm immediately looking at what's on the wall around me.
Interesting.
Because I'm trying to make a connection. And if there's a certificate there that says that they graduated from a university, then I can start talking about, oh, what did you get your degree in? Why did you decide to go down that? And it allows me to immediately make a connection with people. And more so than being a salesperson, I want to be a friend. I want to be a colleague. I want to be that subject matter expert to my customers. But the first thing that I have to do is be real, and I have to make that connection. So the Dale Carnegie course was very, very influential in helping me understand the value of the human connection.
And Dale Carnegie, author of many famous books. I guess the most famous one would be How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great book. I love it.
I'll definitely have to read that. I'm trying to remember. I think Napoleon Hill. I've read Napoleon Hill. I think he was one of Dale Carnegie's apprentices, I think later on.
I'll have to do some research on that. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, so I've read Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. I believe, and I might be butchering this, but I believe that he was under Dale Carnegie's tutelage or apprenticeship, or was assigned by Dale Carnegie to compile this kind of knowledge as well. But it's amazing how this age-old wisdom is still very current today. And I think everyone can benefit from looking into it a bit, because forming connections, I feel, just takes a lot of the nerves away. It takes a lot of the uncertainty away. And especially when we're trying to change the world, this is incredibly important.
And the other aspect of that I think is very, very important is that lifelong learning. So no matter how many degrees you have, no matter how much information you think you know, there's always an opportunity for us to learn, whether it's from a book, whether it's from a colleague, whether it's from someone else. And I love to learn.
No, definitely. Same for me. I've managed to get into reading quite regularly, which is good because it's been teaching me a lot. Now, currently, a lot about AI. So, looking at the history of some of the biggest companies, it's been fascinating. And I think, keeping yourself on top of things also allows you to strike up current conversations with people and build those connections.
For sure.
But according to what you told me, you took that course twice. Was there a reason for that? You graduated from it twice. Was it the same course?
It was the same course. And the second time around was because this same friend of mine had encouraged me to become an instructor. And so I took it from a different perspective. The first time I took it for what can I learn? And the second time it was more from the perspective of how can I help others to learn? And ultimately, timing in life didn't allow me to go back and become an instructor for Dale Carnegie. But it did change my perspective of learning. We can learn for ourselves and we can learn for other people.
Interesting. And I guess, the behind the scenes look with the intention to teach sometimes gives you a even deeper understanding of how the information is best digested.
Yes. And realizing that people learn in different ways. And sometimes as an educator, as a teacher, as a mentor, we can actually do things that prohibit that learning process.
That is true.
And so being aware of the fact that people learn in different ways and we have to allow that learning process to take place.
I guess identify the most effective way that people digest the knowledge and try to cater to that. I think of that too when I design my courses, when I give my lectures as well. It's tricky, definitely.
For sure. Yeah, that was a real big learning experience for me.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing. If you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about the world we're currently in, what would you change and why?
I think it would be kindness. We've turned into a world of automatically attacking people for their opinions. We can't agree to disagree. And it seems like it's getting worse before it's getting better. There's a lot of messages out there about just be kind. whether it's political parties, whether it's religion, whether it's whatever that is, there's so many people that are just quick to attack and to disagree. And I will say that I believe one of the reasons why it's getting worse, not better, is because of social media. We get on social media and we feel like we're private. We feel like we can just say what we want to say. And people take that. There's no emotion in what is written. That's the challenge with an email or a text.
Yep.
And this is something that I tell my salespeople all the time. If you really want to express emotion, if you really want to connect with a customer, pick up the phone and call them so that they can hear the tone of your voice. Because in a written context, there's no emotion.
I certainly agree. I mean, half the times emails come through and I can't tell whether, the person sending the email is upset or whether they're excited or nervous. It's so hard. And emojis don't help the cause either.
No, not at all.
You can't help but think they're sarcastic at the end of the day. No, that's certainly a good use of the wand. I feel like polarization in the world is getting worse. The opinions, people are entitled to their opinions and we don't have to accept it. We can agree to disagree, but I feel like, people have forgotten how to do that. But definitely very good use of the wand.
Thank you.
What was one of the most challenging situations that you've ever faced in your career to date, and how did you overcome it?
So I'm going to go back early in my career. And I was working in a very difficult environment, with a very difficult manager, but I was accused of insubordination.
Oh, wow.
And it really affected me personally, but I think it's changed my career path in ways that I didn't anticipate. Ultimately, it ended up being a positive for me in that I was able to get out of that environment and make some changes and go a direction in my life that has been a very, very positive move for me. I won't say that I chose my career path as much as my career path chose me. And I think this was the start of that process of having a young family and knowing that I was either going to have to fight or flight. And ultimately, I chose to go find another job. And that was in striping and paint and glass beads. And I never would have chosen that path. But at the time, I needed a job. I needed to support my family. And now here I am many, many years later in a career path that I know and love. But it was all because of an accusation of insubordination, which was a complete and total misunderstanding.
How one small event or like one sudden event completely turns things on their head and then it somehow just works out. It's almost like forcing you off the path you think you're taking into the path you actually meant to take.
And I think you just described it eloquently. That's exactly what happened. And now there's bumps and bruises along the way, right? Mm. But ultimately life figures itself out as long as we don't huddle up in the corner and give up.
Yeah, I guess it's true. Because I guess during that time, it would have been tough. You would have been at the end of your nerves and filled with uncertainty as to what you were going to do.
Yes, definitely. Really didn't know what the next step was going to be. But I made a decision and it turned out to be a good decision. That wasn't the ultimate decision, but it led to a path of decisions that ultimately led me to where I am. And hopefully I can get to finish my career where I'm at.
But it's a beautiful story I guess it's also the evidence to show that if you stick to it, you show up and, you just follow the path. Even though you're not sure where it leads, things work out in the end.
And ultimately, there's a backstory to that. And that is that the owner of that company who accused me of insubordination actually ended up passing away on the day that I gave notice to quit.
Oh, wow.
And the boss that I was working for at the time ended up actually serving prison time for embezzlement. So
wow, that's
kind of crazy.
It is kind of crazy. I guess it's you were probably thinking to yourself, oh my God, okay, I think I saw the sign to get out. Wow, what a story. What a twist on that. I wasn't expecting that. But here you are. And thanks for sharing that story. It's always empowering to hear these kinds of stories because it gives everyone who's maybe in a similar situation or who's frustrated that kind of hope and strength as well to trust in the path.
And bad things happen. Bad things happen to good people. Bad things happen to bad people. But ultimately, it doesn't have to make us bad people. It doesn't have to negatively affect us. We can use that to turn around. It could have altered my perception. It could have altered the way that I think. It could have altered my path in a negative manner. I just chose not to allow it to happen.
That's very strong mindset, strong resilience. So definitely a shining example, call it that. So in terms of time management, what tips and strategies can you offer? How do you maintain a balance between your professional and personal time?
That is always a challenge. And I think it'll be a challenge for everyone. I don't know of anybody that I've ever ran into that actually has the perfect example of how to balance that. I think it's an individual thing. I think prioritization. I learned early on in my life that you have to compartmentalize things. Now, if I'm on this podcast right now and I get an emergency phone call from someone, I'm going to hang up and I'm going to take that emergency phone call because that is the priority for me at this point in time, and we can finish this conversation later. Every day we make decisions and we prioritize things one over another. So is your job more important than your family? I can't make that decision for you. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, I know where I stand when it comes to my family, when it comes to my religion, when it comes to all of these things that are important in my life. I was actually asked at one point in time to resign from city council and to give up the responsibility that I had in my religion. And they said, it's too time consuming and you need to give that up. And I took a stand and I said, I will resign from city council. And I did so, but I will not give up my faith. Ultimately, that has proven to be a positive in my life because of the decision that I made. And then that same individual came back later and said, I just want you to know how much I respect you for that decision. So time management is all about priorities. And how do I start my day? I get up every day and I make my bed, because that's the first good decision that I made. And now I just try and make the next important good decision.
One step at a time.
One step at a time. But start your day with something positive. Start your day finishing something. And for me, that's making my bed.
No, that's good advice. I think priorities are important because it allows you to then, I guess, take a lot of the nerves off. If you just go back to your benchmark, what is at a higher priority for me? And it removes a lot of the energy that you would need to make decisions in the first place. Yeah, definitely some tips that, I can also take on board myself. I think sometimes, even if I know there are other priorities, certain things will follow you back home in the back of your mind, and it'll be reeling there for quite some time.
And those things that you prioritize are not only affecting you, but they're affecting those that are on the other end too. So my family knows where they stand with my priorities. And hopefully they carry that on to my grandchildren and moving forward. So I always try and realize that the decisions that I make don't just affect me. They're affecting someone else.
Very true, to be cognizant of that. So what other advice can you offer to young traffic engineers, planners starting out?
Well, I'm going to go back to my favorite saying, when nothing changes, nothing changes. And change is hard to accept, but don't be afraid to make a change. Whether you're unhappy in your career, whether that decision that you make is going to change someone else's life in a positive manner, do what you enjoy doing. Make sure that when you get up in the morning, it's not hard to go to work. And if you can make that decision, then every other decision that you make will be easy. And so as you're starting out your career, make sure that it doesn't have to be something that you love to do. I have a lot of hobbies that I really enjoy doing, and they're not my career. I have a son who does taxidermy, and he really, really enjoys that.
Oh, wow.
And he's battling right now of whether or not that should be his full-time job or whether that should be his hobby. He has a degree in computers.
Mm-hmm. That's very different.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, you can have a hobby, you can have other interests outside of what you do on a day-to-day basis. What's the most important reason why you have to do what you do? For me, I do what I do for those that I love.
Oh, that's solid advice. And we hear the stories, a lot of people following their passions. And I think it's the more and more examples we get, the more, clear it becomes that this is a solid way of, progressing and I guess living that gives you that joy as well.
One other thing that I would say about that, and that is you don't have to be an early adopter. By that, of the changes that are going on, the learning that's taking place in your life, it doesn't mean that you have to be the first one to jump on board and say, okay, yeah, that's right. I'm going to use that. I'm going to do that. It's okay sometimes to sit back and say, I'm going to allow somebody else to make those mistakes. And it's okay to make the mistakes if that's your personality, but just choose the kind of life that you want to live and the kind of person that you want to be.
And I guess one word came to mind when you explained that, which is FOMO, fear of missing out. It's not necessarily a bad thing.
No, it's not always a bad thing.
Yeah. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, but you can also connect with me via our website of www.trafficlogix.com. I have an opinion. I'm not afraid to share it. If you have an opinion, please don't be afraid to share it. Love to hear from viewers, listeners. And if you have a question about traffic calming, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to share with you the experience that I have, the knowledge that I have, a knowledge share is a wonderful experience for me.
And I think it'll be great to connect with you if they're interested. And we'll definitely put all this and all the other information of the things we've discussed today in the show notes so that listeners can read in depth about some of the key topics and get in touch if they're interested in more things related to traffic calming measures and just traffic in general. But Brett, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on today and just delving deeper into this topic, which sheds even more insight into something that just grows and grows in complexity the more I hear about it. So it's been lovely to have you on the show.
Peter, thank you for your time. You're a true gentleman, easy individual to work with. And I'm actually going to go back and I'm going to listen to more of your podcasts. I'm not a big podcast guy, but I think you've won me over.
And I hope you do enjoy the episodes. And like I do with every guest, I always give my guests the final words. So one last message for the listeners to take away from today.
If we don't change our behavior, if we don't realize that the behavior that we choose to do every single day affects other people's lives, and if we're not cognizant of the fact that we need to change our behavior and recognize what we're doing on a daily basis, then we're headed down a scary road. And so I think I would just encourage people to be more aware when they get into a vehicle, when they get on a bicycle, when they're walking down the roadway. Be more aware of the decisions that you make because it affects more than just you.
Thank you.
Peter, thank you.
And that wraps up our insightful and deep discussion with Brett Ferrin. For more information on the world of traffic safety, a rundown on the AI and data revolution on mobility, or just some insights on human behavior and behavior change, check out the show notes for more information over at petermbach.com/podcast. And as always, thank you listeners for tuning into this episode and for your feedback and support. If you're enjoying this show, I would be incredibly grateful if you could share this podcast with your family, friends, colleagues, and even local traffic officers. Subscribe or follow this podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, other podcast channels, or follow the LinkedIn group to stay up to date with the latest releases. If you're curious about me or my work in general, you can also check out my website or social media. Head to petermbach.com, my YouTube channel, Peter Marcus Bach, that's Marcus with a C, or follow me on X @petermbach or Instagram @petermbach87. Feel free to reach out to me with any feedback or guest suggestions so that I can keep improving this show. The podcast's intro and outro song is called Starsky by Alex Kieran. Stay tuned for our next episode and next guest to hear how they are tackling the grand challenges.